Are you on Spotify? Are you on Spotify?
I'm on YouTube.
You're on YouTube?
I'm on YouTube. I haven't done Spotify yet. I have a couple of albums up on Amazon.
Oh, okay.
Of original music.
That
last one was an original, by the way.
So what do we look up on Amazon to find you?
Just Steph and Friends.
Steph and Friends?
Yeah.
Steph and Friends.
Or Stephanie Robinson. And that one you just heard is called Sleep.
Okay. Sleep.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you feel you've been put on a journey?
Absolutely. The answer to that one is yes. I think this has been ordained way from the day I was born. At the age of 26, I was developing female hips. No one could explain it. So something obviously was wrong at the beginning. And Mum pointed it out. She said, "Why are you developing female?" I said, "I haven't a clue, Mum." 26, married, 2 kids. Why am I developing female hips at that age? Made no sense. It still doesn't make any sense. But hey, trust you. In terms of friendships, I value them enormously, and I often go to churches that hate me being there. And I will sit there. This is true, absolutely true. And I will go back, and I will go back, and I will go back. And they'll say some nasty things from the pulpit, and I'll go back. And eventually I'll build up friendships. Because they suddenly realise I'm not there to cause any problem, but just to build friendships. And it changed people's viewpoints. In fact, one of the biggest people I changed was Dr. Don Horrocks of the Evangelical Alliance, who, if you know anything about him, he was, when the Gender Recognition Act was being debated, he was leading the charge against it. So I went and met him under pain of being beaten up by my peers. We had a 2-hour meeting, and I said, well, we may not come down on the same side, Don, but there's no reason why we can't be friends. Changed everything. I think the problem is, and I'm not being derogatory about any kind of way that people tend to want to get things done. What I have noticed is that if people have only ever met activists that are trying to grind their way to get what they want, it often has the reverse effect than if you take the soft option and be a bit more persuasive. So I take the longer term option, and I will talk to people, and when they realise they're dealing with a person, and the person has nothing to grind, no axe to grind, you just want to be friends, then it starts to change perceptions. They never checked whether there was a hormone issue when I was young. Little was known about these kinds of things back then. They tried antihistamines, nothing worked. It was only in later life when I went on estrogen therapy, they realised it had benefited the skin enormously. And I don't have those issues now. I think the challenge with any kind of organisation that has a flow through of personnel, it really depends on who the person is at the time that you're trying to make a report. What we've found, and I'm hoping that one of the superintendents, who's a good friend of mine that's just moved to training in the Met, is to start looking at how we might start to include it. You've got to remember, a lot of the cutbacks are responsible for the lack of training in areas such as diversity. But I've done training courses with custody staff. I've done frontline training courses with people, but the churn is so high of officers coming through that to try and capture everybody is a bit of a challenge. And it's not, as the Met is trying to balance the books, it's finding it ever more difficult to bring in outside sources or even to release people from day jobs to actually do this kind of pivotal training. It's just one of those challenges. It's about managing the risk factors alongside the budgets. Many of my colleagues have said this should be a particular role for you, Steph. But it requires money because someone needs to pay the salary at the end of the day. So that's going to be a challenge. I don't know how that might come about, but it might. There were occasions where I came away from some of those churches thinking to myself, God, why have you sent me here? But it only comes out as to why you've been there in later months, maybe a year or 2 or 3 years down the line, when suddenly you realise that people are actually greeting you and welcoming you as part of the Christian world and not pushing you away. Now if I return back to the church, even the leaders will come up and put their arms around me and say, "Oh, it's so good to see you, Steph." That wasn't the case at the beginning. So it's just by going back, but not trying to be abrasive, but trying to win them through gentle persuasion, and even saying, "Okay, I know you don't agree with me, but we can still be friends." And I think people are very responsive to that. They certainly have been in my experience. Oh gosh, 40s? It's absolutely fantastic. This weekend I was with the grandkids. We all took them out to a little seaside jaunt down in Clacton. Me? Is there an underlying sort of a question there?
Yeah, we're going to move on from that one, Joey.
All right, I'll shall I be conservative in my answer?
Yeah, you can say. Yeah.
All right, mid-60s.
Well, that's good. Well done. That's it.
But you have to remember, it's not the age, it's the mileage. I think because what was back there was so horrendous that going forward for the surgeries, by comparison, was heaven. It's hard to imagine what it was like back there, but life couldn't exist. I couldn't exist with that kind of life. It was just horrendous. Even the kids were under threat of being taken into social services during that time, and I couldn't do that to them. So it was better for me to follow this course of action. In terms of boyfriends, which is a question that no one's asked, I learnt... It's a good question. I'm asking myself the question now. Yes, there's been boyfriends in the past and some very good relationships in the past. And I've learnt to adjust my thinking to fit the female role. And that's where I sit, and that's where I probably will until the day my time on earth is finished. It did, strangely enough. It's quite peculiar. Again, I'm navigating areas that I've never trod before. And it's quite interesting. If you look at it from a scientific point of view, people would say, well, how did you manage that?
Can you treat us like idiots and go a little more into that? I'm really, I wasn't brave enough to ask that, but can you kind of, yeah.
I think it started when I had a boyfriend who was actually an airframe mechanic in the Royal Air Force. And we were so good together that it just kind of worked. And I think it just developed from there. So I've had about 4 boyfriends in the past. I'm not with anybody at the moment, but it just seems to work better that way for me. Strange, isn't it? I like it. Never mind. Go on, carry on. Next question, please. My personal view? I would say that right at the beginning that probably was true. But when man fell from grace, I think then you've got all the kind of different variations that came into life, and that's shown through nature as well. So I think the creationist viewpoint, I think, kind of gets himself stuck in the mud a little bit. I don't agree with their position, but that's their position. And I've met some very hostile American alleged Christians in my time. What I can tell you is that all through the times, the dark times, good times, God never left me. Whatever happened, whatever place I was in, He never left me. And I'll give you a very good example of that. The hormone, Still Bistro, was man-made, very, very strong, and I got overdosed on it for a year. I went to Guy's Hospital, casualty department that they had back then, said I'm in trouble with my kidneys, they wouldn't treat me. Go to Charing Cross, where the clinic's based. So I go to Charing Cross Hospital, go to their clinic, their casualty department, they won't treat me either. Go back to the clinic. I walk back to the clinic, I see this John Randall, and the first words out of his mouth is, "You should be dead." Now, coming back to the point that God never left me in any of these situations, I had no liver damage, I had no kidney damage, there's absolutely no damage from the overdose. There should have been. Should have been massive clots running through my body. There was none. I think I've learnt, and I'm still learning, to listen to the God's Spirit that often guides me internally. It's not always a voice, it's not always clear, it may be an impression. I need you to go this way. And I own about 9 guitars at home, but quite a lot of them came into my possession because of those impressions. Steph, I need you to go up here, I need you to do this. It made absolutely no sense to me. If I spoke about the bass guitar that I've got, and I can't play bass, but I've put bass on most of my recordings that I do at home. I was at work all day long, and I said, I keep getting this impression I've got to go uptown and buy a bass guitar, but I haven't got the money for it. And this impression wouldn't leave me. So I go uptown, and I don't know if anybody remembers the Virgin Megastore that was on the corner of Oxford Street, Tottenham Court Road. Do you remember there was a musical store underneath it, in the basement? So I walked around and I'm looking at these bass guitars, £1,000, £1,500, way outside my bracket. It made no sense. I said, I don't know what I'm doing here or why I'm wandering around this store. Just as I'm going to go home, I find a whole load of budget bass guitars stacked around a pillar. Now, the point being, I bought the guitar, took it home. When I went back to the store, it'd gone. The store had gone. Go figure. In those early days, yeah. They don't use Still Be Straw anymore because it was lethal. Or found to be lethal. It was back in those days, yeah. And the thing is, there was no legal protection, so if you killed over and died, that was your bad luck. And that was the NHS clinic treating you. It was your bad luck if you killed over and died, as it was back then. It was one of the most extraordinary clinics I've ever been to in the NHS, I must admit. I would say it's a lot harder, depending on your age, to transition from male to female, depending on your age, and whether puberty is set in and locked in. I think for females, going from female to male, the hormones do an awful lot more work. The other way round, as I said to earlier in the evening, vocal training, deportment training, training with a model agency, training with a makeup organisation. There's a lot of elements that I had to get involved in order to make this thing work and work so that I could come out the other end of it where the kids could be proud that I've actually achieved something. And in the police, I've now got 7 commendations for the work I've done around this issue, which is pretty stunning, I think. But I countered that by asking myself, well, why not me? Why not me? And quite often you might get an answer back, well, I need you for something up ahead. It's not clear what that up ahead was at the time. It's a lot clearer now, but it wasn't back in those days. I just had to trust and rely and just keep focused on what the goal was. It's the only way I could work it. I didn't hold their resistance against them. Right. Let's start with that. Yeah. I understood that from their perspective, it's alien, it's strange. They've got no comprehension of what's going on. They don't particularly want to know what's going on, which is probably more to the truth of that. because they were cosy and comfortable in their own little world, and I was a threat to that world, and I kind of understood that. In those very early days, even my immediate family wouldn't call me Stephanie, they'd call me Stevie. And I wasn't big on this issue, because I knew at some point the change would be so dramatic, so fantastical, that it would be almost impossible for them to address me as anything else. And that's turned out to be true. But it took an awful lot of patience. It changed for me in 2004 with that experience with Dave Stroud. I've never forgotten that. I wrote it up in my book, What God's Done for Me Is That Thick, because I record a lot of this stuff. And for me, that's when I suddenly realised he's actually real, he's there. Doesn't matter what anybody else thinks, I know he's there. And doesn't matter whether people walk along the journey with me, don't walk along the journey with me, I know he's always there watching my back. I think there's an opportunity that all of us can have that type of relationship. We just have to start changing our thinking, our mindset, and start getting a better connection. Because quite often we have to, it's a bit like a radio, you know, when you tune in radio, you want to get your favourite station. And quite often life will throw something at us and it sends us off kilter. It's to come back to that centred place. And for me, if it gets too difficult, I like to go to a place of quietness. Just sit there and be quiet. Just let everything just fade away and just be quiet and focus. And that's been a massive source of strength. Don't know if that's helpful, but...
Well, Steph, thanks so much. That's been absolutely wonderful. Hasn't she been great? Shall we give her...
Here's the advert.
Can I tell you about that picture on the front? You know, I told you that my brother and I were doing photography to see how my progression was coming along. That's a selfie in a mirror.
The first selfie.
Yeah.
And of course, you used to be a model as well, didn't you?
I did model for a while, that's true. And in fact, it was those pictures in the magazines that led me to start the first ever deportment training course for male to female trans people back in the mid-80s, working out of the London Sexual Studies Centre over at Earls Court.
So I want to say thank you very much for sharing. I mean, one thing that came over to me was it only takes one person to become a friend. And sometimes, if you're like me, we can shout out about LGBT issues and really be strong and shout out about it. And that's important to do, but more important is befriending people, because that's what changes people. I remember one Archbishop of Canterbury was very anti-divorce until his son got divorced. And he started changing his view. I remember speaking to a person who was very anti-gay and very, suffered verbal diarrhea from it. And but once she got to know somebody that was gay, she slowly started changing her view. And I think it's right to shout. The more people we get to talk to and just share our story. And that's the important thing about Open House, sharing the story. So thank you very much for doing that.
I hope it was entertaining.
It was great. Yeah, it was great.